In our next panel discussion on learning agility, equipping leaders with skills to learn, unlearn, and relearn, our experts are all set to dive deep into the fundamentals of learning. To share their views, we have our esteemed panelists, James Felton III, Vice President for Inclusive Excellence at the College of New Jersey, Joel Roberts-Robles, Principal of Keokuk Community School District, Professor Maria, Faculty at the University of Toronto, Dr. Alexandra McDermott, Founder and CEO of McDermott Leadership, and Celine Pinet, President of Analytics at AlgorithmX Group. Let's welcome our panelists to the stage.
Hello. Hi, my name is Maria. I'll be your moderator. And don't worry, I'll make sure that everyone gets to introduce themselves. But we're here today because we, as educators, are in charge of other people's education. But we also need to focus on our own education. How can we continue learning, be lifelong students, so that we can enable our own students to perform their best, achieve their career goals, and their life goals? And we're going to cover on how can we do this? How do people learn? What do we need to do? What are some key trends that we need to focus on that are really hot right now and no one has solutions for? And then what is some advice that everyone can take home to really put this into action? So to introduce the panel, I'll quickly go first. I have a little bit of a trifecta of a career. I teach at the University of Toronto in strategy and communications. I also teach a lot of organizations through my own consulting practice where I develop organizations and help them grow. And I also have a corporate background in brand building at Procter & Gamble for more than a decade. And over to Celine.
Yes, hi. My name is Celine Pinet. I have a PhD in environment and behavior studies. I taught in higher education for many years. And then I was pulled up by the ponytail because they needed administrators. And so I served as dean. I eventually served as VP in academic affairs. And there's two themes of my career that I want to bring to your attention today. One is that I was in charge of online education for many years, and so that's the technology side of academic affairs. And the other one is that I was in charge of enrollment. I was involved with enrollment from the start pretty deeply. That is ensuring that we got enough students, ensuring that we offered the right classes and that we were able to fill them. And now I'm in my second career. I did my years in education. We now started a small business. It's called AlgorithmX. We do big data, data science, and we use AI. And one of my specialty within that business is to work with colleges and universities, helping them get enrollment. Right now it's hard. They're all struggling with that, so that's what I do. That's one of the things I do.
Ali.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us after lunch. We really appreciate it. We also know that we are live streaming, so we have no clue how many of you are watching, but we really appreciate it. So my purpose in life is to help others discover their purpose in life and lead a fulfilling and joyful life. So I've now opened my own coaching practice where I help global leaders and developing leaders. So I've done many things throughout my career, which has led me to this point. So very excited to talk about leadership, learning, agility with you today, and I'll pass it along.
James.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is James Felton III, and I am the Vice President for Inclusive Excellence at the College of New Jersey. I got my bachelor's degree in psychology as well as my master's in educational administration from McDaniel College. Currently working on a PhD in global leadership at Indiana Tech in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I've spent all of my professional career in higher education, working for different higher education institution types, from 2 years to 4-year privates to publics to system and university system offices and units. Diversity, equity, inclusion has been my life's passion, and I will be speaking about that as it relates to leadership agility today.
Lovely. And Joelle.
Good afternoon. My name is Joel Roberts-Robles. I currently have worked as a principal at Keokuk Middle School in the Keokuk School Community District. Well, my master's, I have received a master's in educational leadership from Mercy College in New York. I've also have a master's in special education and instruction from Pace University. I have my bachelor's in theater education and theater from the City College of New York. Most of the work that I have done over my 16 years in education has spanned over making personalized opportunities, personalized learning, work-based learning, and also really getting agency and voice and increasing that in learning organizations.
Great. Now that you got to know the panel, let's get into it. Before we talk about trends, we wanted to double-click on what does leadership learning agility mean? And so I'll call on Ali just to touch on who is it that needs to lead change in leadership agility, and then we'll touch later on what they need to do.
Okay. Give me while I get set up. All right, when we talk about leadership, we need to first define who is a leader. And how do you become a leader to begin with? When you put the term leader into Google, how many hits do you think you get? Any guesses out there? What do you think? Anybody willing? Everybody's smiling back at me. They're like, do not call on me. I've had those looks before, been a professor for a long time, so I'm gonna let you off the hook. Okay, you get 4.6 billion hits in half a second. When you put leadership into Google, you get 9 billion hits. If you ask your neighbors right now to define leader or leadership, they're gonna give you a totally different answer. I love that. What does that mean for us, especially for professors of leadership? It means that leadership and leaders remains top of mind in research. It produces great, productive, ideological conflict, right? That's great stuff. What I'm gonna tell you though with certainty is anyone can be a leader. That's a universal truth, I think, right? And it takes a follower to be a leader. Now, I'm gonna also tell you though, as a leadership professor for many years, that your job as a leader is to create other leaders and not followers, right? For the purposes of our conversation today, which is leadership learning agility, the ability for a leader to learn, unlearn, and relearn, that's our whole conversation, we need to know who gets a seat at the table. Well, in education, of course, we're talking about faculty, staff, executive leaders, right? Administrators. But we're also talking about other leadership stakeholders. Look around the conference, right? Those are all of our strategic leadership partners. Law, legal advisors, marketing teams, financial consultants and their teams. Every single person we've interacted here with for the past 3 days is a potential strategic leadership partner. So I'm gonna tell you this. In order to be truly agile in a pretty volatile and uncertain world, right? Leaders across industry really need to connect. We need to share our knowledge and our expertise. We need to engage with each other. We need to meaningfully connect. And we need to do all of these things to propel us forward. This is what it means to be truly innovative.
Thank you, Ali. So let's quickly touch, before we get into trends, how should we approach learning agility differently? Because arguably what we've done in the past likely doesn't work anymore with new technology and new trends. And so I'll call on Joelle. Talk to me a little, and how should we in the audience approach doing? Like, what do we need to do to be agile learners?
Okay, so there's no secret that COVID has actually changed many schools, many learning organizations, and the way that we actually solve problems. This is one of those tasks where learning agility has actually gained a lot of steam. One of the things that we had to do during COVID was we had to relearn and reactively teach, you know? How do we get ahead of things is one of the things we need to think about moving forward right now. We all have felt that moment where we were uncertain of what was going to happen with the pandemic. We were all uncertain when we all switched to Zoom, or we started using other platforms and learning management systems. But as a personal learner, you had to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. That is something that is core to learning agility. We also had a lot of dynamic problems. We now live in a world where many problems are dynamic as well as complex. And we have to be able to embrace them with others. So, one tidbit I'm going to give in answering the question right now is we have to think in through, we have to be more open to a growth mindset. We need to become proactive. We have to be willing to learn. And also willing to understand when we don't know when we don't know something, or when we really think we know something, but we don't know. We have to embrace that. A lot of times we develop those biases and we look for confirmation of what we already know. And we have to start taking a deep look at ourselves and really examine and say, maybe there's another way. So, we need to take a look and start thinking about not just knowledge, but competency. And so I'm going to now take it over to you, Maria.
Lovely. And I think, James, you wanted to jump in here, if I'm not mistaken, just quickly. Yes.
I've recently become a follower of a podcast called Becoming a Stronger Me by a former colleague and friend, Nassim Ibrahimi. And in one of her sessions, she talked about decision making. And she started off with a quote by Dr. Phil McGraw, commonly known as Dr. Phil. And the quote goes, "Sometimes you make right decisions, sometimes you make the decision right." Life is all about options, otherwise referred to as decisions. We make decisions every day. Many of our decisions are based on physiological and psychological needs, like it's time to use the restroom, or it's time to eat. Sometimes we're faced with making a split decision, like, do I want to attend this session today, or do I want to hit the strip, or do some other things for those who are streaming. Sometimes our decisions are bigger, and we are faced with making big decisions, more importantly, life decisions. These are grounded in fear and uncertainty, and I would add lots of trepidation, such as, am I ready to be in a committed relationship? Do I want to have kids? And if so, am I ready to have kids? Do I really want to pursue a terminal degree? How will I know when it's time to retire? How do I continue to live my life's purpose? If you haven't figured it out by now, these are all the questions I ponder about day in and day out, right? Nassim also talked in her podcast about a 2021 Psychology Today article by Dr. Adrian Camilletti, who defines a big life decision as a decision that is intentionally made between two or more choices with significant long-term impact. Big decisions are ones that we have an opportunity to have a thoughtful process around. Sometimes we don't always get it right. And then what? As Dr. Phil says, we have to make the decision right. One of the difficulties of human behavior is our ability to resolve our issues. That's why therapists will never go out of business, right? And so when we talk about this notion of leadership agility, I think of it as an ability to reflect and act on, as well as resolve big decisions in times of crisis and uncertainty. It's about knowing when and how to pivot and how to be comfortable with the decisions that we make.
Thank you, James. And I liked this theoretical discussion on learning agility, who's at the table, the mindset we need to have, because to be honest, I don't think we have a choice anymore. COVID forced many people to learn, And now that we know the things that could be coming, how do we do so proactively? I worked with a few organizations that are doing this really in an interesting way. They are making learning mandatory. Learning something new, a new skill, a new competency, is part of your performance review, is tied to your pay. And while this could be a dramatic approach, I thought it was quite progressive. They are investing in their workforce, much like universities and colleges invest in us, and we have to bring a return on the investment. We have to stay in touch and agile and relevant. So with that in mind, we wanted to touch on two big themes. And the first one is around the learning experience. I know the majority of people at this conference are from the US, and we all know the major changes that have been happening in the learning experience for millions of students in the US. And these happen in multiple countries as well. And as we think about the learning experience, it's up to us, the leaders in the learning experience, to drive change that helps our students, whether that's early educators, K-12, university, or even adult learners. So I'll call James to really talk to me, how can we drive the learning experience, specifically addressing the gaps in the learning experience that we've heard on in the past 2 days.
So again, my background is in psychology and leadership, but the work that I do is centers around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so if you take nothing away from what I say today, it is this. I think that we need to stop focusing on equity gaps and start focusing more on opportunity gaps. Our students understand what grit means. They know that the struggle is real. They live it every day. They don't need to be taught about that, right? They need to learn how to manage that and how to leverage it in order to be successful. And so I'm guided by the work of Dr. Stella Ben-Simone and Dr. Tia McNair-McBrown, who, if you haven't read their work, I highly encourage you to pick up their book, Becoming a Student-Ready College. And in this book, they talk about how to meet students where they're at. And I think this is part of that leadership agility, is being self-conscious about, or being self-aware, I should say, about ourselves and our potentials, but also looking at the potentials of those who we interact and teach. And we know learning is very didactic, right? It's very instructional. You're sitting in these seats, you're looking at experts here up on the stage, right? And so Stella and Tia say, stop that. Throw everything you know about traditional models of teaching and learning out the window. As Joelle previously discussed, the world dramatically changed with COVID. It literally changed overnight. Everything that my faculty peers knew about the ways of higher ed were completely called into question. The same thing could be said about many of my higher education peer leaders. I witnessed a lot of imposter syndrome during the pandemic. There was a lot of faking it till you make it. But unfortunately, a lot of my faculty and administrative colleagues didn't make it on the other side of COVID. The pandemic broke their confidence. People couldn't coast on automatic pilot. We had to learn a whole lexicon of infectious disease terminology in less than 4 months. We had to be decisive yet nimble in our daily activities. Faculty had to learn the essential elements of universal learning design, as well as the physiological and psychological effects that quarantine, isolation, and long COVID were having on the teaching and learning process. More importantly, faculty were forced to come to the unfortunate realization that they had been marginalizing, othering, and gaslighting students throughout their entire professional careers. Meanwhile, we all had to learn how to share bigger spans of time and space with family and significant others when some of those relationships were already strained to begin with. It's amazing that any of us standing here or sitting here in the room made it through the pandemic, right? But this is the world that we live in. And over the course of these 3 days, we've talked a lot about AI. Celine's going to talk about that some more. We need to wrestle with the pros and cons of technology, how it can be used to create good deeds, and how it can be used to weaponize entire communities or groups of people. And so my point is that we have to engage in greater, more intentional decision-making as the life and the world continues to throw us imaginable curveballs that are no longer first world problems, they're 21st century problems.
I love that thinking as Joelle, you go up. I love that thinking of how do we drive change and resiliency in this VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, which is really just the regular world around us always at all times. So tell us, Joelle, how can we, what do we do to build that self-efficacy in this VUCA world?
So it's interesting, just to go back on something you said, James, to talk about, how the pandemic has brought us through and how some people didn't get through it. One of the things that we're finding that I just want to touch on is we have to understand what conflict is. And so I take a look at Neil Christie's work when it comes to thinking of conflict as property. And the reason why I bring that up is because as we get and as we navigate the world since COVID, you may find yourself getting in more interpersonal conflicts when it revolves around learning. And one of the things that we have to get comfortable understanding is you have to reestablish engagement, but you have to first understand when you're approaching that conflict, you have to be willing to engage it. A lot of us will sometimes either avoid it or try to find a way through it and come to some compromise. You need to start thinking about that conflict and why is it happening? What is it bringing to the table? What is that learning that you disagree with, that doesn't support your confirmation of what you already believe or what you know? And now you need to wrestle with that and go back to the drawing board. And that's one of those ways that you can start thinking, going back to that drawing board and saying, what if I don't know? What is it that I can hold on to? Because we're all confident, we all make decisions, we all experience things when we're learning, but we must be able to sit back and sometimes say, let me throw this out and start again. And I know that's a brave, courageous action to do. So that's one of the first things. The next thing is reestablishing an engagement with what you're learning and with whom you're learning. You need to really take a real deep dive on who you're serving, why you're serving them, and what your intended purposes are. Building self-efficacy is the belief in oneself that they can do it. We have to put that forward, ladies and gentlemen, because that's something that we need to make sure that we're putting into the work with our employees, with those we hold, our stakeholders. So some of the examples, just to clarify that, is doing student-led initiatives, so that's at the school level, or working with your employees to have them lead initiatives. You do not have to have all the answers to everything, and working with others in collaboration can provide you the ability to problem solve, engage diverse perspectives, and address community needs. As we heard earlier this week during the first day, when you give agency and voice to those you serve, that you will actually start to build the power and build your communities. It's imperative that we do that at this time. Building that self-efficacy comes through the motivation, and that's where learning agility lives. That's where we make people more agile with their learning.
I love that. I love the idea of learning through others as well and empowering others to help solve the problems that we don't know how to solve yet. So thank you, team. In the interest of time, let's move on to our second big theme. We'll switch gears a little bit. To no surprise, AI is on everyone's mind, and not just ChatGPT. There are so many other tools that enable technology and learning. It's a hot topic. Celine, I know this is right up your alley, so I would love to know, what's your take on learning agility when it comes to AI enabling tools?
There's been a lot of questions about AI in education and wanting to ensure students don't just use it to get away with doing the work. At the same time, not allowing AI to be used in education is definitely going against the tides. And we as leaders, we're talking about leading, we're talking about learning agility. We need to prepare students for the future of work. That involves AI. It just does. And so the next step for me is to really think through the differences between the way we think, the way we learn, the human intelligence, and the machine intelligence. I'm going to point to 3 differences for you today. There are many more, but just to get you started in thinking this through, there has been really good research published, I think it was in April 2023, so it's very recent, by Maura Dillon. She published that in the Journal of Cognition, and she showed that infants do well at making inferences about the motivations people have that lead them to actions, but machines do not. And if you think about it, infants themselves have different motivations than the machines. But that's one of the big differences that I want to bring to your attention. Another one is that AI does not do well with trivial prompts. We've all tried to go in ChatGPT and ask it questions, and I've gotten some trivial results. Garbage in, garbage out. So we need to teach students to really develop critical thinking and good prompts in order for them to be able to use these tools efficiently. And one of the things I do now, I teach part-time on the side from my business, and I ask students to give me their prompts with their assignments so that I can see the critical thinking piece and how they're using the tool to try to get beyond the triviality of it otherwise. So that's a second difference. You need to have a good prompt, a good prompter to help the machine move forward. A third difference that I'm wanting to bring up today is that AI is not good with recent or rare events. And the reason is simple. If you think about ChatGPT, it was trained using a generative AI type of model based on natural language processing. So what it does is that it learns word patterns, and it gives you back word patterns as you ask it questions. And if you use data, if you're researching a topic that has not been patterned yet because it's too recent, or if you're researching information that has not yet been learned from by the AI, it's more recent data, so the AI has not gotten to learn it yet, it won't come out. An example of that is I ask my students to give me a lit review on a topic looking at articles from the last 3 years. ChatGPT does not do good at that because their articles are recent. So you see, again, the difference between human intelligence and artificial intelligence and what one is good at and what one is not, and how to use them best. And I'm sure you can think about all sorts of other differences between human intelligence and artificial intelligence. As Maria has brought up, there's a lot of debates around AI.
And I love that idea. It's funny, on the teacher side, if we think about that AI isn't good with the recent, isn't good with that critical creative thinking, that's where we get students to learn. You know, many of us have had to change all our assignments, all our approaches, all our exams. There is no more lit review of anything that's been in the past. There's no more summarize key points, tell me your point of view. Now it's all, how do we couple that? I'm assuming you're doing your secondary research with ChatGPT, but now do primary research. You have to talk to people. You have to do experiential learning. So we have to also learn how to do assignments differently, how to motivate students differently. And Celine, I know when talking, you had a couple really cool examples. Like, how do you, in the creative field, use AI?
Yes, so I can give you 2 examples. I can think of an example that applies to arts, can be applied to other domains as well, and one example that applies to history. In fine arts, there are AI tools that have emerged, like DALL-E is very well known, Starry.com is another one. And people have been asking, will this put artists out of work? What do you guys think? Will it? No. I don't think it will. My early career, I studied design and architecture, and when I look at digital arts, it often, to me, lacks the hooks a good piece of art has, which makes you go back to it, want to look at it again, getting immersed into it, think it through. It just lacks that. There are some pieces that are really good, though, so that the AI tool are just, to me, like a new type of paintbrush, where if you're a good artist, if you're well-trained, if you have talent, you can use that paintbrush in a very creative way. and it opens new doors to art. You may have heard about Beeple. He was the first to, as an artist in the US, he was the first to produce an entirely digital NFT using new tools that was sold by Christie, the big auction house. It sold for $60 million. It was good. It's work that took him 13 years to put together with images that he collected through these years, and you look at it and you want to look at it again and again and again. There's also another one by Anatoly, who's doing metaverse type of images. He's trained machine learning to look at 75 million pictures of flowers and 50 million type of scents. And he creates metaverse for us to get immersed in. So it's using tools to do something very creative, something very powerful. As tools, they need the human behind. In history, I heard about this lady. Her name is Holly Tucker. She's French, and she teaches at Vanderbilt University. And she has her students go and use ChatGPT to create dialogue that would have taken place during the French Revolution. Then she has her students go and look at the dialogue that ChatGPT created, and she asks them to think through whether they're talking about the right issues, whether they're using the right wording, the right tones. So these are two examples of showing students how to use critical thinking. And I also think it's important for us to keep in mind that there are a lot of questions that have emerged as a result of us teaching with these tools. One is that ChatGPT pulls from previous data. It pulls pattern from existing data. And so does it then run the risk of replicating historical biases? And AI is developed by people like my husband, white guys in Silicon Valley, okay? They're not all white, they're not all guys, but there's a lot of white men in Silicon Valley working on AI. And so they're designing these algorithms, and with that, of course, comes some biases. For example, ladies, did you know that your phone and any voice recording app, any voice interpretation app is much better with Guy's voice than with our voice? That's not okay by me. Is it okay by you? It's not, right? Another example is that Apple in 2022 was sued because they trained their new watch that look at the oxygen level in your blood on white skin. And during COVID, as a result, a lot of people with darker skin were misdiagnosed because it wasn't reading the oxygen level in their blood right. So I look at my colleagues and I'm thinking, do you have less oxygen in your blood? No. So there are biases that are inherent to these tools.
And Celine, I love what you bring up, and sorry, apologies to cut you off, just so we can keep moving. It's an opportunity for us to, A, learn about the tools, but also learn with our students and include our passions. Because I always love hearing you speak about AI. You clearly have a lot of passion, and you incorporate it into the work you do with your students. And I think that's an opportunity for us to be agile, not just learning academically about the new tools, but actually incorporating our passion into it and helping our students incorporate their passion into it. It's a new playground of sorts.
Indeed.
And the last thing I do want to touch on AI, and Ali, I'll call you up because we can't talk about AI and not touch on ethics. It's a huge topic, so I would love for Ali, as an ethics prof, to talk to us about that.
All right, so first and foremost, I love AI. Okay, so before I launch into a whole conversation about ethics, I just want to get that out there. So don't run away from AI. Celine just gave us incredible examples of how to leverage AI, right? So don't run away from it, run towards it. But you have to be mindful of what AI does and what it doesn't do. Okay, so we're going to start with this, and this was actually an exercise performed by UNESCO. When you put in greatest leaders of all time into Google, and we know that Google actually uses AI-based, software, etc. What do you see? Again, greatest leaders of all time. If you click on the images, you see pages and pages and pages of male leaders, right? I did that this morning, and I saw tiny little images of female leaders. Okay, and again, Celine touched on this a lot, right? She even gave a reference to her husband in Silicon Valley, right? It depends on the inputs you put into AI. So we have to have this conversation about ethics. We have to also talk about bias, right? So what does that mean for you as organizational leaders as you embark on this digital transformation era? Just because something becomes an industry standard does not mean it meets ethical standards, right? We know that. And when it comes to innovation, AI is just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many things that are coming our way. And it's great. That's what innovation is all about. But you need to be very clear as an organizational leader about your own set of values, right? What are your non-negotiables? What is totally unshakable? What are your borders, right? You need to be very clear about that, because as an organizational leader, you set the culture for your entire organization. Every single person there watches everything you do and everything you don't do, everything you say and everything you don't say, right? You set the organizational tone. You set the ethical tone. So when it comes to AI and ethical standards, and really, you should have an ethical code for your organization already that you should be living and breathing for every single decision you make, right? You need to assemble a team, and this also comes from research, and on that team, at a minimum, are 4 people. Your business leader, your legal advisor, your technologist, right, your AI person, and your ethicist. There are 4 people that need to assemble on that team at a minimum, okay? All right, I'm gonna pass it along now.
Lovely. Well, I know we have just a couple minutes left. So what I wanted to end with is just one concrete tip from everyone, 20 seconds or less, that someone can take away. Because I know we covered a lot. We covered, what we need to do as leaders in being agile in our learning. We covered the gaps or the opportunities in the learning experience, resiliency. We covered AI and ethics. So there's a lot. So maybe your biggest tip that someone can go do in the next 24 hours, think about.
Yes, to me, to survive and thrive, you have to ask questions. You have to keep learning, and not just when you need to because of something in front of you, but constantly. And we've asked a lot of questions today, so keep thinking about all of this.
Right. And so to piggyback on that, I'm going to be very specific and reference a book by Julia Galef. It's called The Scout Mindset. I really implore anyone who's not familiar with that, please get familiar with that. Be open, be curious, be grounded. Again, suspend judgment, ask questions, become a truth seeker, right? Don't seek to defend your position. Innovation requires you to be open, right? Be open.
I think just to add on to what Ali said, sit in your uncomfortableness as you think about thoughtful decision making. Particularly in times of uncertainty and crisis. And my makeshift kind of mindset is what I call CPR. Confidence builds purpose, and purpose builds resiliency.
And because we're running short on time, everything my colleague said.
Lovely. What I'll leave you with is something I use a lot, because every classroom is different, all of your classrooms are different, every organization is different. So I like to use the WIFT framework, what's in it for them, which enables you to put yourself in the audience's shoes and figure out what they need from you, and then you add that to your action plan, and you customize your own learning to enable their learning. So what's in it for them? thank you guys, everyone, for joining us. I hope you learned a little tip